Her artwork has been regionally and internationally exhibited and is included in the multiple institutional and personal collections. She is the author of Infidelities, Poinciana Paper Press, 2017, which was longlisted for the 2018 OCM Bocas Prize for Caribbean literature, as well as the artist book A True and Exact History, which won the 2019 Holle Award for Excellence in Book Arts. Her poetry has won the 2011 prize in the Small Acts Literary Competition, been shortlisted for the 2020 Montreal International Poetry Prize, and has appeared in various journals and self-published limited edition chapbooks. She holds a BFA in writing from Pratt Institute and an MFA in book arts from the University of Iowa. Here's Sonia Farmer. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much for that introduction, Letitia. And thanks everyone for attending. And yeah, we have a slideshow up here that I will be using to supplement my talk. I write better than I talk off of the cuff, so I will be referencing my speech in front of me, but I'm happy to take questions at the end, and I hope you enjoy. So my name is Sonia Farmer, and I am the creator of the piece that you see here on the wall behind me called The Hole in the Ocean. We'll get to why it's called that in a minute, or maybe a few more minutes than a minute. It's later on in the presentation. But what you need to know to start off with is that 100 years ago, a man named Ernest Williamson led the first of 5 expeditions that would extract 40 tons of coral, as well as several hundred fish and related sea life from the Andros Great Barrier Reef. That's where we're starting. Not too many people know about this history, but by the time you finish with me, you're going to learn some things. So some of the work that some of the slides that you'll see here are taken from archival material. I have visited the archives at the American Museum of Natural History, as well as the Field Museum, and I'm still continuing this research, so I'm just showing you what I've done so far. But it is ongoing, as I'm very interested in the ripple effect of this expedition. So let's hit the next slide. Uh-oh, the iPad is on strike. All right, well, I'm going to start talking about it a little bit, but you will see the image come up in a moment. So the Andros Coral Reef Diorama is located in the Hall of Ocean Life in the American Museum of Natural History in New York City. It's a 2-story diorama composed of an above and below scene of the Bahamas, with the bottom half displaying an underwater coral reef. This section of the diorama is approximately 16 by 16 feet. As the web page about this attraction on the American Museum of Natural History website says, the diorama depicts a real place at a specific point in time, a Bahamian coral reef on a June day in the 1920s. So this is 100 years ago, we're thinking, okay, guys? So just think 100 years ago. And here, it's up. We love that. And so now here, we can see that just 100 years ago, now critically endangered species of coral tower within a rich and dense display of marine life in the bottom half here. These images come from the American Museum of Natural History website. So let's hit the next slide. All right, here is a timeline of the 5 expeditions that it took to complete the diorama. We're going to focus on the second expedition, which is the Bahamas Coral Reef Expedition, for the purposes of this presentation, as it involves Williamson's assistance, and it was also when the coral itself was extracted. So the first expedition was just preliminary to set up contacts and where they were going to set up camp in Andros and what part of the reef they were going to use. That's when he first also spoke with Williamson, or the museum made contact with Williamson. The second expedition is what we're going to talk about today, where 40 tons of coral were harvested. The third expedition is when a majority of the fish casting happened. The fourth is when a lot of undersea plants were harvested. And then the final expedition was just a final comparison of the diorama pieces underwater to the existing living coral to make sure it looked like it. Pretty wild. There is a lot to say about all of these expeditions, but we'll just talk about the second one, like I said. Okay, so let's hit the next slide. All right, so who is Ernest Williamson, right? Williamson is remembered as a filmmaking pioneer as well as a conservator, which we will get to. We're going to circle back to that later. But really, he was a filmmaking pioneer because he took the first underwater photographs and moving pictures ever. That's what is said. So he used the device called a photosphere, and you can see the photosphere in the top here of the slide. This is a picture of Williamson from his memoir, and then this is a photosphere also appearing in his memoir. And you can see underneath, it's a funny looking kind of device, you know. And then you can see underneath it, there is a photograph, an underwater photograph, one of the photographs taken on the expedition in 1924. And on the side is a diagram of how the photosphere was used to take pictures, still images and moving pictures underwater, which is that it's basically a submersible, and it gets lowered down into the ocean via a tube attached to the ship on the surface of the water, and the person who is going down into the submersible descends down the tube, and they can look through a very thick glass plate window in order to observe or take their images. So that is what the photosphere is. So his father had actually invented the submarine tube, the spherical diving bell, for use in salvage operations. And John and his brother George developed their father's model to create the Williamson photosphere and take the first underwater photographs. So after initial experiments near to home in the Chesapeake Bay, he took what's considered the first underwater photographs in 1913. And he published this first account of underwater photography in the Virginian Pilot, which is a newspaper where he worked. So that gained him quite a bit of international attention, and he was invited to exhibit those underwater photographs in New York at the first motion picture exposition at Grand Central Palace. So there he made a lot of contacts. I'm not sure if this was when he got on the map of the curator at the American Museum of Natural History, which is located in New York. I'm not sure, but he did get a lot of international attention, and he was approached by a lot of people. And it was through this that he was able to secure funding in order to take the photosphere, which he made some improvements to Nassau, to the Bahamas, to take his pictures and films underwater in our waters, because of course they were clearer, the light could penetrate through, it was shallower, and the light reflected off of the sand at the bottom. So it was really great for taking photographs, because of course what you really need is light, right, for photography. So with funding and improvements to the photosphere, they arrived to Nassau in 1914. And then Williamson made such films as the Williamson Submarine Expedition and 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, the Jules Verne story, which garnered him, again, much attention and success as a filmmaking pioneer. So that's Williamson. He's one part of this story. The other part is Dr. Roy Minor. That's in the next slide. So these films attracted a curator from the American Museum of Natural History in New York, Dr. Roy Minor, who in 1922 had just been promoted from associate curator to curator of living invertebrates, which is what a coral is. With extensive field work in wharves and tide pools of New England and the coral reefs in the South Pacific, he was tasked with creating precise and colorful reproductions of these environments for the museum, so dioramas, right? So after an accepted proposal to create an ambitious two-story diorama of coral, pulling from the nearby coral reef sources in the Bahamas, yay proximity, Miner went on to go onto the first of what would become 5 expeditions to the Bahamas in 1923 to begin preliminary preparations and meet Williamson. So that was in 1923. So in the next slide, there's a bit of correspondence. Now, I just want to, sorry, before we go on to the slide there, that is a picture of Dr. Miner. And I know it's a bit blurry here in person. I don't know if the live stream can see it better, but this is just a page from the American Museum of Natural History annual report for 1923, which just reviews Dr. Miner's initial expedition. And then here is some correspondence between Williamson and the American Museum of Natural History acting director, George Sherwood, where Williamson's services are negotiated. Again, you may not be able to see everything. Basically, Sherwood just outlines what the expedition would involve, how Williamson's work has been very inspiring, how he would like Williamson to be involved, and Williamson accepts to help, but he does ask for funds to cover the operation for his photosphere and boats for about $2,000. But he will donate his services to help make the diorama, or harvest the coral rather. So let's head to the next slide. So yes, that's Williamson's negotiation there with Sherwood. And then here is some more correspondence where, in the meantime, the museum also writes to the governor of the Bahama Islands, Sir Harry Cordeaux, to obtain the permission and cooperation from the Bahamas government. Remember, we're still under British Empire at the time. So Cordeaux agrees and even lends one of the government tugboats to help transport the fleet to Andros from Nassau, just requesting that they cover the coal costs, which I think is $500 each way. So yeah, all permissions granted by about April 1924. So they get ready for this expedition that summer. They're probably already getting ready for it while all of this was getting sorted out. So in the next slide, I just want to take a look here at the budget and the funding sources for this expedition, because I believe we always need to ask where the money and support came from for extractive projects such as these. Who was compensated, how were funds utilized, etc. All of that can give us a really interesting look at how we place value on our environment, right? So I found these figures and funding sources through multiple documents in the American Museum of Natural History archives, and note that this is only for the expedition, this expedition, because remember there are 3 others after this. Initially, the trip was projected to cost $3,000, but that was after the initial preparatory visit in late 1923, and then that figure went up to $5,000, and it covers various things and sundry. But you can see the funding sources listed there, which I don't have in front of me. I might have right here. Let's see, because I think we should read them. Let's see. Well, various folks are thanked. I don't have my funding list here. I thought I would be able to see my slides a little more clearly. But anyway, it's been up long enough. I'm sure that we can see. Here we go. The Angelo Heilprin Exploring Fund and the general funds of the museum, as well as through the cooperation of the Submarine Film Corporation, which is Williamson's business, and the officials of the Bahamian government. Also, the Morris K. Jessup Fund and the Trustee Emergency Preparation and Exhibition Fund. And then, of course, a few individuals were thanked as well. Elgin Forsyth, who was the commissioner of Southern Andros, whose energetic cooperation and knowledge of the coral reefs were invaluable in the expedition. Also, George H. Gamblin of Nassau, a member of the council who extended many courtesies to us. And finally, Mr. E.C. Mosley, who acted without compensation as the headquarters agent of the expedition. Also, the A. Schrader's Son, Inc. donated the diving suit for the expedition. All in all, it cost about $6,500 eventually, even though that was projected to $5,000. We'll come back to that. But I just thought we should know where the money came from. Anyway, let's take a look at the dates. Next slide, yes, thank you. Okay, so here I just wanted to break down the location and the dates of the expedition as well as the fleet, because there were a lot of boats involved. And so the Andros Barrier Reef, we can see in this little map that I have on this slide. I also found that in the archives. I am not sure who made it. It's uncredited, but it's in the files, so perhaps one of the artists or even Williamson or Miner themselves, I'm not sure, but it does show the location of where they took the reef, parts of the reef, because of course the barrier reef is along the eastern shore of Andros, and it goes for like about 120 miles, broken at intervals by channels. So they anchored near the Middle Bight entrance of the barrier reef near Mangrove Key. Now, in one of the letters, they say that they're headquartered in Little Golding Key. I tried to look that up, and I found a few, like 3 Golding Keys, and they were all far away from this spot. So I'm not sure. Maybe there is another spot called that nearby, but apparently they were headquartered in Little Golding Key. And all in all, they were in Nassau, or they left June 6th from New York and returned to New York July 30th. So they were in the field in Andros for about 4 weeks doing their work. All right. So in the next slide, we have the team. I love this photograph. It's just like everyone is in the photograph, except when I found it in the archives, it didn't, like on the back, it didn't have any names. So I knew that Dr. Miner was in the middle there. I recognized him, and I recognized Mueller, who is standing next to him on the right. But I was trying to figure out who was who in the rest of the team. So we have, and then all of their roles here are listed. So we'll start from the right, and that's Chris Olson. He's a modeler and an artist in the Department of Living Invertebrates, so he made sketches on this expedition and fish casts and models on the following expedition in 1926, and he came on the final expedition in 1933 to double-check the coloring of the coral with Dr. Miner each time. So he's pretty involved, and you're going to see him also in the photos later on assembling the diorama on the New York side. He was heavily, heavily involved in this project as like the modeler and the artist. So next to him is Williamson, who's holding the camera. Then we have Dr. Roy Miner in the middle. And then we have Herman Mueller. So Herman Mueller was a glass modeler at the American Museum of Natural History. They had a glass modeler, and he was really, his work is exquisite, so beautiful. He made the glass polyps and other organisms for the final diorama display, but his job here was to coordinate the coral bleaching. That was his job. Then, next to him on the end, we have George H. Childs. So George Childs is another artist and colorist in the department who made reef and fish sketches on this expedition. Someone else who should be mentioned, who isn't pictured here, is J.L. Jacqui, and he is a museum artist who went on the following expedition in 1926. And he went on to design and paint the background of the diorama. It was really quite beautiful, the top floor, especially with the flamingos flying. So he's not pictured here, but I thought I would shout him out. So how did it work? Let's go to the next slide. So this is a colorized sketch that was originally drawn by Malcolm Jameson after sketches by Williamson and the museum staff to show the setup of the operation. I'm not sure who colorized it. It's from the Philip and Patricia Museum. So how this worked, as you can see, I explained earlier that the photosphere is accessed through like a long flexible tube from a boat at the top. So the artists, like such as Childs and Olson, would go down and they would make sketches of the underwater reef system. So they're trying to get the colors as accurately as possible in order to recolor the models later on in New York. So they're down there making their sketches, or perhaps Roy Minor is down there selecting the coral, or perhaps Williamson is down there taking photographs and moving images of the coral. So about 2 people could probably be down there at a time. It's kind of a small space. But essentially, do you see the person in the diving suit there at the end? Also, just notice how tall that coral structure is. 100 years ago, y'all. Wowzer. I don't think you would see that today. I really don't think so. So the person in the diving suit, who would usually be Williamson, he would be directed by the folks inside of the photosphere to the specimens that the museum wanted for their display. And if the piece was light enough, he would just use his hands and move it up himself. But if the piece was very heavy, and some of these specimens were very heavy and they were removing them intact, he would use a crowbar. And then they would use this pontoon with these chain lifts or a rope lift to lift the coral up to the surface. Yes, so that's how the coral was removed from the reef. So then there was also a large concrete aquarium belonging to Williamson that was installed on the shore for the artists to make sketches of freshly gathered specimens before their colors faded. Because of course it doesn't take long for the colors of fish and coral to fade when they're taken out of the water. So they had to work quickly. And when the coral was moved onto the shore, it was kept wet until the animal tissue came off, leaving just the exoskeleton white and bleaching it in the sun. So like I said, Dr. Mueller was in charge of this. When they were finished gathering their specimens, lumber was brought in from Nassau and boxes were built around the specimens, and then they padded all of the specimens, because I want you to understand, like, these weren't just broken pieces they were going to glue back together later. Like, some of these things, like, they kept them at size. So they padded everything with sponge clippings from a local sponge house for shipping back to New York. So let's go to the next slide. Oh, good, thank you, great. So here are some supporting materials I just thought it would be interesting to see to illustrate how the photosphere was used. So we can see in the top right corner here, that is an image of the coral harvesting. So that may be Williamson. He was the one who was really in the diving suit most of the time, so it's most likely him in the suit. I don't know, no confirmation there though. But you can see he's the rope from the pontoon is in there. So he's harvesting some coral. Again, these are all from the American Museum of Natural History archives. This is a photograph of the seabed underneath it. Then we have a fish casting at the top there that was done by Olson. And then this is a painting done by Olson as well, down here at the right bottom corner. I don't know my right from my left, so please forgive me. So something kind of interesting about Olson's painted work is that he didn't do it on this expedition, but by the time the 5th expedition came along, he was painting underwater, legit. He would use a heavy metal easel and he would stretch an oil canvas around a glass plate so it would be heavy, and he would apply oil paint with a palette knife underwater with the diving helmet on. And the results are really wild. But this is not one of those, you can see, because the painting is quite smooth. When he's painting with the palette knife underwater, it's like really, you can see the evidence of the palette knife in there. But yeah, we're not talking about that expedition, so that's why I didn't put an image in, but I thought that was a fun fact. It's pretty cool. Yeah, okay, next slide. Okay, so here is some field correspondence from Dr. Minor after some time in Andros, describing the coral they've observed, their first time in the photosphere, the bleaching of the coral, and how Williamson would remove the chosen coral specimens from the seabed at their direction. And again, I know it's a little fuzzy for you guys sitting here in the room with me, but the excitement is really palpable like from Dr. Miner. He's really excited by all the coral he's seeing. Everyone was floored when they went down into the photosphere for the first time. I mean, you can imagine the coral is so beautiful. So really seeing it is, you know, a game changer for them. In fact, well, we'll talk about it later. That's not this expedition. Okay, next slide. All right, so here we have a selection of the corals back at the American Museum of Natural History, which are colored and ready to install. So this is by 1928. So remember, they were in Andros 1924. But I wanted to just use the image to share some facts and outcomes about the expedition. So the exhibition harvested, bleached, and shipped 40 tons of coral from the Andros Barrier Reef to the American Museum of Natural History. The shipment was made up of 31 cases. The largest coral specimen weighed 2 tons and measured 12 feet wide. The expedition produced 1,000 photographs and 2,000 feet of motion picture of underwater reefs. And 60 watercolor sketches of the living coral in the natural colors were made for reference. Yep, $6,500. So now, yep, next slide, thank you. I'm sorry that you can't see this, but I have the quote here. I just thought this was a really interesting little archival find that is like a further point of exploration in the future, perhaps. On page 3 of his final report of the expedition, Dr. Miner mentions that he was gifted by the Commissioner of Southern Andros, Mr. E.W. Forsyth, a series of Aboriginal skulls and limb bones found by him in a cave in Andros. Where they are now, the archivist could not tell me. Anyway, next slide. All righty. So once the coral was back in the museum, the preparation, painting, and assembly began. So though it was projected to take only 3 years to make, the diorama ended up taking 12 years to complete and required 3 more trips back to the Bahamas. To cast fish specimens, again in 1926, to harvest undersea plants in 1930, and to make a final comparison in 1933. So you can see here that Olson, that's Olson again, so like I said, he's like in all of these photos. So that's Olson and Dr. Miner together. Olson is working on a small, like a miniature model. So he made a small model of each essential coral mass on a scale of 3/4 of an inch to a foot. And these were built up into a little miniature composition, which was their working model for the installation. And in a way, like when I tell you about how I made my work, it's very similar. So I was like, oh, that's interesting when I found that out. And then in the next image, you can see Olson and another curator, Bruce Brunner. They're painting the diorama. So it took about 6 months to completely clean the coral exoskeleton of the animal tissue back in New York. And then the pieces were filled and sealed. And then the artists coated them in a thin layer of beeswax, simulating the color of the animal layer that was removed. And then they colored them with oil colors on top, simulating the underwater structures and colors as closely as possible. That's how it was made. And then there was a final expedition in 1933 where Miner and Olson took pieces of these coral reconstructions from the diorama to hold side by side underwater next to the live coral to approve. So, yes, that happened in Rose Island. They didn't go back all the way back to Andros for that one. In the next slide, yes, you can see the steel framework, or parts of the steel framework holding up the diorama. About 6 tons of steel work was used and crafted by a man named Louis Bouvet. He was a skilled iron worker. I am not sure if this is him in the picture with Olson. These are from the digital archives. You can find these photos online through the American Museum of Natural History website, their digital archives. But I know that's Olson. But the gentleman who's down there working on the steel frame is said to be Dr. Miner, but that's not Dr. Miner. So I'm not sure if that is Louis Bouvet himself. I'm not sure. Unknown man. And then in the final slide, this is a shot of the diorama in 1934, getting ready for its opening to the public, 12 years later. Okay, next slide. This is this is like one of those moments when you're in the archive, and if anyone here spends time in them, there's like this kind of like little moment where you happen upon an interesting little piece of ephemera that doesn't make any sense and doesn't really have too much attached to it, but it also speaks to you, maybe as an artist or a poet or a curator. This is like a photograph or a painting of the underwater seabed, and like a circle is cut out of it. And I don't know why. There's nothing attached to it. But what's very interesting is that the photosphere was called the eye in the ocean, like the seeing eye in the ocean, but also the hole in the ocean. And I was like, right, of course it's called the hole, because it left behind a hole in the ocean several times, because we haven't even gotten to the Field Museum, you guys. But so I just thought I would include this image because that was very interesting. But yeah, so why does this matter, right? Like, why do I care? It was 100 years ago. Nothing can change now, whatever. So here are some fun facts about what happened after this expedition. During the 12-year period of making the diorama in 1927, Miner proposed a similar expedition to harvest coral from Australia's Great Barrier Reef using the photosphere to the tune of $200,000 at the time. At the time, I don't know what that would be today. Weirdly, there's a letter that approves it from the president, but no further records exist of this happening, so I'm guessing that it was probably dropped. But yeah, so that happened. That was a bit weird. And then in 1929, Williamson himself would lead and coordinate another expedition that mined 30 more tons of coral and fish near Sandy Key for a diorama at the Field Museum in Chicago, being compensated about $12,500. We're not going to go into the Field Museum, but I have a bunch of research on that as well that is very interesting. But I just share this to illustrate that how there was like a mindset, or rather there still is a mindset, not only that Earth's resources are infinite and are there to be extracted for the gain of developed nations and their institutions, you know? And some people have said to me, when I talk about this project, some people have said, oh, they're a product of their time, they didn't know any better, and now we know better. And my question is, do we? Like, do we know better? Are we doing better? So I'm highlighting one incident, but it exists within the ongoing project of modernity that sees certain places and certain people as sources of extraction, as disposable, in the name of progress, right? Furthermore, white supremacist principles form the foundation of natural history as a discipline, full stop. Without reckoning with racial history and working with indigenous protectors of Earth's resources, these principles will continue to control the conversation about climate repair in the future. It's controlling it now, but it'll continue to do that. So I see a connection between this as well as other incidents, because plenty of people were disrespecting coral out here. Plenty of explorers were disrespecting coral out here, and the current coral extinction crisis today. It wasn't the only event or the only space to experience ongoing colonial violence, but make no mistake, these expeditions required the collusion of governments, institutions, and individuals to freely exploit the natural resources of a vulnerable colonized nation for over a decade. That's why it matters to me today. So after these expeditions, the photosphere became a tourist attraction in the world. It was the first undersea post office. So a couple of people have heard about this. It was just sunk in the Nassau harbor, and people could go down the tube into the photosphere and look at the beautiful sea gardens in the Nassau harbor. And I just mentioned this, like, this is part of the research that I'm really, really interested in finding out more about through the local archives, I hope. So I don't have a lot about it, but it was only a tourist attraction for like, I want to say like four or 5 years. I have the dates up there, 39 to 42, yeah. It's like during the Second World War. It's kind of, I guess that's probably why I didn't do too well. But maybe it did. It sort of captured the national and world imagination, and it did a lot for our tourism project, and it did a lot for showing Williamson's, like, promoting the work that he's done through his career through the photosphere. And I just mentioned this to draw attention to the ways that tourism and eco-violence go hand in hand. I am not sure what happens to the photosphere after this. I still don't know. That's an ongoing question of mine. So, next slide. All right. This is a pamphlet from the National Trust from 1981. So I found this at the Field Museum, interestingly. So what narratives endure about Williamson cast him as a conservator, a groundbreaking filmmaker, and a major contributor to Bahamian tourism? But while Williamson received accolades and compensation for making films depicting the beauty of the Bahamas, he also actively destroyed the ecosystem he exploited. His films shaped popular imagination of undersea life in the West, not only through its language such as underwater fairyland and enchanted underwater forest or colorful underwater jungle, which exoticized the underwater landscape, but also through his films that depicted underwater struggles of man and shark or giant octopus, showing the man as the victor over the undersea fauna and the damsel in distress saved. So he's conveying this message that the underwater world is a space to conquer. So like the moment that you take the first images of something, you shed light on it, and you create the narrative. So he had a responsibility to create a certain narrative, and this is the narrative that was created. Now, again, we have to think about him in his time of like just ongoing thinking about places such as the Bahamas as like, you know, a place for extraction, a place to take advantage of, a place that can be disposed, you know. So he's coming from that headspace, but it is interesting. I mean, I think that we have to talk about what his films were, what they made, what they set up. So, next slide. So there's a current coral crisis, right? 100 years after this expedition, seawater temperatures are so high that the coral remaining in and around these sites, as well as other coral-rich areas in the world, are dying before our eyes. You know, like we have lost so much coral. And I have to like do a little disclaimer right here, because people who know me know that I'm not like an outside person. And so by that I mean I like to be inside, reading my book, writing, researching, whatever. I don't really go to the beach that much. I've never liked it. I feel like someone's gonna go take my Bahamian card on the way out after this talk. But like, I grew up on boats, going out to the beach, all of that, but I never really liked it. I didn't scuba dive, I don't snorkel, I'm afraid of the deep ocean. Like I am like the people who Williamson targeted to go down in this photosphere so they could actually see underwater. That's me, by the way. Okay, so I just need to put this little disclaimer out here, like I don't do that. However, I recognize that corals are critical to our future on this earth, and so I am concerned. Like, I'm concerned. I don't need to go outside to know that we still need outside, right? Yeah, just wanted to put that little disclaimer there. So, let's see, next slide, I'm gonna talk about how I made my piece. Thank you for hanging in there. So that was all the research behind making this piece, or towards making this piece. And this is just the first of like many ways that I would like to engage with this history. So this is the first, and I'm really excited that the NAGB accepted my proposal and then like made me do it. Because it was just an idea, obviously, as a proposal. And then I actually had to make like a 12 by 8 foot pulp painted piece. So I wanted to excavate the enduring physical, ecological, and cultural void of this pillage by reconstructing the bottom, like underwater half of the diorama in a poetic and handmade paper assemblage. So the work is made entirely out of handmade paper. Each sheet is a base of handmade paper on top of which wet paper pulp fiber in a variety of colors is painted. So this is all painted pulp, paper pulp. So that's what I work with as an artist. I use handmade paper in my work. But how did I make and by the way, I wanted this to be to scale, but it's not, it's smaller. Because 16 feet wide I saw a lot of figures about how big this piece is. 16 by 16 feet, which like doesn't make sense, but I'll have to go see it again, is the general consensus of what the measurement is for this bottom half of the diorama. But I ended up doing a 12 by 8 foot just due to size restrictions and my sanity, but who's to say I will not add more, you know? So how did I do this? So in this slide here, you can see that I'm tracing, so I have a source image of the diorama there at the bottom, and I spent some time tracing sort of like 3-foot measurement of it, just to get the contours of everything, the placement of the coral, just to understand spatially like how it worked, right? And then I cut this down into 30 tiles proportional to my mold, so that's here. So I cut it down. So my paper making mold, which ends up these panels here, right, is 19 by 25 inches. And you'll see a picture of that later. But just to understand, I had to reproduce this diorama on panels that were that size, right? So that's why I cut this down into the proportion, and then I scanned them and made them that size, printed them out, and I pinned them up to the wall. So in the next slide you can see, so that's how they are bigger there. And then in the next slide, I pinned them all up to the wall in my studio. And then I colored them with colored pencils. It was kind of like a giant coloring book situation, just for my reference, my color reference later, because then when I'm actually painting with the pulp and I take one square, I can't really tell what is what in the square, so I need it to be colored so I can know where I am at and what I'm reproducing. And so yeah, so this is all color blocking, basically. And then that's some of my color decisions. I'm really self-conscious about my ability to work with color. Like as a printer, like a letterpress printer, I work very well with traditional like 5 colors, like black, white, gray, beige, red. And I have used those in other pieces like A True and Exact History, which was up in the previous expedition, Eco Horror. But yeah, I had to really go all out with the color, guys, because coral is colorful. So it was interesting, it was scary. But these were the colors I settled on, and then you can see on the right-hand side, the squirt bottles there are all filled with paper pulp that's pigmented for painting with. And then in the next slide, that's my base sheet, so that's these panels here. Just a white base sheet is what I start with, and that's handmade paper, so that's the size of my mold, so you could sort of see it in scale, and I'm making it outside at my press when the weather was cooler than it was now at this time of year. And then in the next slide, you can see some of my pulp painting. So, like I said, with the squirt bottles, I could apply color. I also use spoons, and I would block sections out by scooping pulp on there. And so what's really great about pulp painting is you can like layer and layer and layer. You can scrape it off. It's very like malleable in a way. And you get this sort of 3-dimensionality before you press it, because then of course you have to press it to get all of the water out and dry it to get all of the water out. So it has to be flat eventually. But yeah, that's the process. And then in the next slide, I worked on 4 at a time. And I made sure to work in different sections on the diorama because we wanted to expose parts of the piece, this final piece, to go with the show theme void, right? So I only did half of the panels. The rest of the panels are coming. So it's all going to be completed eventually, but we wanted to embrace the void for a little while. So I worked on 4 at a time. And then, and then the last part, I'm going to end on a poem. So why not? There's text in the piece, and that's because one of the other projects I'm doing with this research is a poem, a poetic response or a narrative. So the poetic narrative is an erasure from 20 Years Under the Sea, which is the 1936 memoir by John Ernest Williamson. And it's all about how he invented the photosphere, and it's actually provides a lot of really great information. Some things I question. It is a sensational memoir, but it is very, very interesting in terms of my research. But I am using that to make an erasure and a new poem out of it. So what does that mean? So as a writer, I'm interested in using text as a tool for disrupting and investigating existing narratives as a way to question their inherent power structures and expose alternative marginalized voices. So I like working with historical documents because who gets to decide what is a historical document, whose voice is platformed, and whose voices are erased or marginalized when we create history, right? So one of my primary approaches to doing this is, through historical accounts. So an erasure is an experimental writing process which eliminates words from an existing text to produce a response with the remaining text. So I remove a lot of Williamson's memoir to create a new poem out of some of the words that are there in different voices. I'm still doing this. It's an ongoing project. So this is just one chapter that we've put up here, and it's in the voice. It's in the voice of a wave in the ocean, and also, the photosphere. But I am mining Williamson's language backwards through the book as an act of repair. So I'm thinking about if we start at the end of the memoir and we work our way back to the beginning when he invents the photosphere, like, what does that feel like as erasing the damage? I know the damage is done, but I'm just talking about like how we can engage in acts of like healing as artists, you know? So I'm confronting the enduring violence, loss, and grief of this historical pillage through this exercise. Part of the exhibition here is a recording of me reading this poem that's on the wall, if you'd like to hear it. And I'd really like to shout out my brother, Liam Farmer. He made it sound so good, like I'm underwater and all these different noises are in there. He's like an amazing sound engineer, and he did this for me. I'm so grateful. So pop the headphones on and have a listen if you'd like to hear that part of it. But I'm gonna end with a part of the poem that isn't on the wall, and it's from the beginning of the poem, which is the end of the book. The thrill of great silence about us carried our fury. Dead were counted above, but when we arrived, we just encountered open sea. The leaden menace, intangible, cleaned and stored away. My mind sailed back to his mesmeric glare fixed on us. Little explorer, I have seen a fairy tale wreck mouths, gorging themselves on adventure. The islands cut the lips of their invading, but he always gets his meal. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you. That was an endurance exercise. Any questions? Anything? This is my final slide. That's another one of the pulp painted pieces. I just love how they look when they're wet. It's so cool. Too bad you can't really preserve that. It would be like rotted by now off the wall. But these are all of my sources, which you saw throughout the slides, the little credits in there. But that's where I got all of the images from, and I appreciate the use of them. Yeah. Yes, Ricciardo. But do you need to? Yes. Okay.
I don't know if I missed it, but during their excavation process, like this taking away from the live coral, a part of that process was bleaching, right? And shipping and packaging it. In your research, did they have any record of why that process was like necessary. Like, was it like, I don't know how it was back then. Like, obviously they were just taking coral, but like, were there any like import regulations? Were there any, like, you know what I mean? It's like, it's so weird. It's just like, because I'm sorry, like, if you dry anything from the sea, it's going to smell, especially coral. So I'm wondering, like, if they had anything on record, like, you mentioned or you showed a part like where they were like painting the process. I'm just interested. That's probably why it took 12 years and not what they predicted, like 5 years. So I'm not sure if anything you saw like had anything, or it was just very romanticized, like the whole process.
Thanks for the question. So I will say that Dr. Miner already had extensive knowledge about corals he had done some site research in the Pacific. I have it down here. And the South Pacific. There's a second coral, like coral diorama, like next to this one in the hall from the South Pacific that I think predates this one. I can't remember. I think it does. But that's all to say, I think like he knew the realities. Like, he's the curator of living invertebrates, and he's a trained scientist and did a lot of research work. So I think that he knew what to expect. But yeah, I think that they knew that they would have to basically kill the animal off and keep the exoskeleton, like the framework, so that then they could like paint on that. And there were as far as I know, there are no regulations. Like, I think once they got the cooperation from the Bahamas government, like that's probably was enough. You know, they had, I have so much correspondence, and that's where like the amazing magic happens. It's so good. The letters are like so juicy. But there are like a few letters that they were always carrying around saying like, we are guests of, you know, like just in case they got stopped or something, they could like whip out the letter and be like, Sir Harry Cordeaux said it's cool for us to be here. And I don't know if that also went on with the shipping, but I do recall that there were shipping difficulties when it came to the Field Museum, more so than these. And I think that they sent it by train instead of by ship, because I guess Chicago has like the main big train station, hub, and so that was all sent by train. And I think that there was a problem. I remember there was a holdup, and actually Williamson talks about it in his memoir, like it's very dramatic, but it works out. It gets sent. But that's all to say, they just bleached it as much as possible for the shipping, so that I guess the most of the stink is off. They hung up the sea fans and like other sea plants and things to just dry, and then just shipped it. But back in New York, I read that it did take 6 months to fully clean like all of the animal trace off of the exoskeleton, leaving that behind basically. Yeah. Scary. Probably smelled really bad. Like just a whole beach of death. This is another art piece, I'm thinking now. Anyway, yeah. Any other questions?
Talk to me about the curator of the National History Museum. You said you couldn't find anything. Oh, his papers. Yeah, and I know you mentioned something about the money and where it's coming from. Who exactly paid Williamson to the museum? So it was a curator.
Williamson was paid like for this project $2,000. And all of the funds came from the list I put up there. So it's several like different funds externally and within the museum as well. And then some things were donated, like, Williamson donated his services. And then a few people, especially in the following expeditions, donated their like yachts and boats, and then the diving suit was donated for this expedition, a brand new diving suit for someone to be like in the water harvesting the coral. But so, yeah, something that was very interesting when I went to the archives at the American Museum of Natural History is, of course, I did find correspondence written by Roy Minor, but in terms of like his papers, there weren't too many, like they were not there. And I did find out that he left his papers to another museum in Miami. And I was trying to figure out how I was going to get there. Actually, just on the way here, got some news today about being accepted into a conference in October in Miami. So I'm going to do the research while I'm there. So I'm really excited. And then I still have to work with I have to go into the local archives, which I have not done yet because I've just been so busy. Yeah, especially to see, like, I don't know Williamson's papers either. That's a whole other story. He has a lot more of his correspondence and saved in the Field Museum around that expedition. I remember I was reviewing my notes, and I remember when I was looking at that specifically, I thought to myself, his wife is typing all of this up. And then at some point I was like, suspicions confirmed, I am dictating this to, it was like the role of the erased people in the archive too, because like the other thing, not as prevalent in this, or not as like pressing in this expedition, but especially the one for the Field Museum. I mean, the amount of like Bahamians who pitched in for that, because it was just Williamson and a taxidermist that they sent from the Field Museum, Leon Prey, that's it. And so they had a lot of local folks helping out, and like the erasure of the black bodies in that archives, or in that correspondence and everything specifically, very interesting. Yeah, a lot to explore. I'm very interested in Roy Minor, like I'd love to see his papers. And the other thing that I didn't find a lot of too were like these watercolor illustrations. The image I showed you guys of the painting underwater is like a black and white photo of the painting, so you don't even see like the colors, but it's color painting. It's a painting. It's not that they painted in black and white, right? But like, where are they? There weren't too many in the archive, so they may be with Minor's work, or they may, like the artists themselves might have left their papers elsewhere. So it's like an ongoing thing. I don't know where it ends, because there are all of these paths, but super interesting. Yeah, super interesting. And when I first started researching it, what was out there like were all of these mix-up facts too, that like, oh, it was 40 tons for like one of the museums isn't even like meant, like they said, oh, the American Museum and then the Field Museum, and it was all 40 tons. Like imagine my surprise when I got in there and I was doing the math and I was like, oh my God, 40 tons was just the first expedition. Because then we did 30 tons with the Field Museum, and then that wasn't even in Andros, that was by Sandy Key. I didn't even realize that, so I had to like get in there. They were saying that the items were sent by train, but that was just for Chicago. So yeah, there was a lot to sort out, like based on initial, like, Googling. Yeah, it's very interesting. Yeah, any other questions? Okay, thanks for coming, appreciate it.